Before we get to an analysis of one of the mitzvahs of this week's Parsha, which is the mitzvah of not charging interest on loans, I'd like to first analyze a commentary on the beginning of the Torah about the way that man is described when he's first created. If you look at source number 2, the way that the Torah describes how Hashem created man, it says, "Vayitzer Hashem Elokim es ha'adam," that God formed man, afar min ha'adama, earth from the ground. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life. And then vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, and thereby man became a living soul, or a living spirit. Now, we know that there are a number of ways of understanding what lenefesh chaya means. The Aramaic translation of the words lenefesh chaya, anyone remember the famous Onkelos commentary? It says, L'ruach mimalala, that Hashem made man into a speaking creature. Lenefesh chaya, a living spirit. But that's problematic, because if you're telling me that the words lenefesh chaya are unique to the human condition, that doesn't seem to ring true, because we find the same exact term is used to describe how God created animals as well. In the previous chapter, in the first chapter of Genesis, which is source number 1, Vayomer Elokim totzei haaretz nefesh chaya lamina, that God said, let the earth produce a nefesh chaya, living creatures, each one according to their kind or their species. Behima varemes v'chayto eretz lamina, right? Both domesticated and wild animals. And so it was. So the word nefesh chaya is used both in the context of man and is used in the context of the animals. So how can you use the same term, especially according to Onkelos, where we say nefesh chaya means a speaking creature? Why then use the same exact term for animals? This is the point that the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin of the 19th century, sets out to explain in his commentary. And you'll see why this is relevant to our Parsha in just a moment. But let's first take a look and see what he says. We're just going through a smaller piece, but it's in source number 3. First, the Netziv brings the explanation of the Ramban and Rashi to explain what the term nefesh chaya means. But he says, "Va'adayin lo nitba'er heich mashma b'lashon nefesh chaya dichtiv ba'adam ba'ofen acher milashon nefesh chaya dichtiv b'chol ha'beruim." What is not clear is how the words nefesh chaya, a living spirit, mean one thing for a human being, and how they can mean a totally different thing for all other living creatures. Aval ha'inyan. So let me explain to you. He says, "Deshoresh chai b'lashon hakodesh mishma'o pa'am chai v'lo meit u'pa'am chai v'lo atzev." He says as follows. He says, what does the word chai mean? How would you translate the word chai? Life, or that's used as a noun, right? But really, as a noun, it would really be chayim, right? Alive. Chai is alive. So what does alive mean? I feel alive! So what does that mean when you say, I feel alive? Does that mean, thank God I'm not dead, right? Even in the vernacular, my point is, even in the vernacular, when I say I feel alive, am I saying I'm alive and therefore I'm not dead? Or I'm alive and therefore I'm not depressed? Yes?
It's also a feeling of meaningful.
I feel I'm doing something, I'm realizing my purpose, I'm filled with meaning and purpose, right? So alive, in both in English and in biblical Hebrew, both convey one of two things. You either mean to say that I'm alive and not dead in one context, or alive and not depressed or not devoid of something. And it depends how the context is used. And he says like this. He says, "V'hainu shehu b'tachlit hashlemut she'efshar ba'oto bria," that I fulfilled my sense of purpose and meaning because I have reached the apex of my species. That's what it means to be chai. To be chai is to say, I've made it, I've arrived at what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. Uvesefer Shmot Aleph Tetet Zayin be'arnu diyesh nafkamina ba'otiyot ha'shoresh. Hainu d'chai v'lo meit shorsho chayai, d'chai v'lo atsev shorsho chaya. And he says, if you wanted to get technical and etymological, I explain elsewhere that the word chai is derivative of actually two different shoroshim, two different three-letter shoresh, sources, roots. The word chayai, that when you say that I'm alive, not dead, is chet yud yud, that's the three-letter shoresh. And when you want to imply that someone is alive, meaning fulfilling their sense of purpose because they've reached the apex of what they're supposed to be, that's chet yud hey. Okay, so that's the technical part of the commentary. So therefore the Netziv says as follows. He says, V'hinei behema nikra nefesh chaya, ba'od shehi beri'ah kefi teva yetzirata. So when the Torah describes animals, God created zebras, He created cows. Each one of them was nefesh chaya in the sense that they had reached, at the time of their creation, they fulfilled all of the physical and other criteria for a zebra being a zebra. When God created the zebra, it was a perfect zebra. It had reached the apex of zebraness upon its creation. Okay? Ma she'en ken adam lo mikri chai, ela ba'ofan shenefesh hasichli gam ken shalem imo. But the completeness of a zebra is completely different from the completeness of a human being. Both terms are used correctly because the term nefesh chaya, as it's used in Genesis, means that the way that God had intended the zebra to be is exactly how it was produced. And the way that God intended the human being to be, reaching his complete sense of completeness, that very first Adam, that very first man, was totally nefesh chaya, it was totally complete and reached and was able to be the apex of what a human being is supposed to be. Now what is the completeness of a human being? A human complete person is someone who has reached intellectual completeness. Because the thing that distinguishes a human being from other animals, certainly from other mammals, is the intellect, the ability to reason, the ability to be self-aware, the ability to be contemplative. So Adam was created with all of those abilities to perfection. The Adam mi Yisrael shenotzar liot bo nefesh Yisrael margish ba'avodat Hashem lo mikri chai ela kasher hu bishlemut yitzirato. And therefore, and he's very Kuzarian in his approach at this point in his commentary. Remember that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had said in the first essay of the Kuzari that Jews have a different set of fulfillment criteria. A Jew is created differently from other human beings in the world. A Jew is created with a different kind of soul, and therefore there are different expectations of fulfillment from the Jew. A non-Jew has only 7 Noachide commandments. A Jew has 613 commandments because of their greater soul capacity. And therefore, a Jew is only called Nefesh Chaya when the Jew is fulfilling all of its potential as a Jew, different from any other human being. And really, if we were to break it down even further, every single human being is created as a unique Nefesh Chaya. And you're only really alive, in this sense, when you're fulfilling, like we said before in our discussion in the Kuzari, when you're fulfilling, you first, number one, identified what your personality traits are. You know what your capacities are. You know what you're potentially capable of. And when you feel that you're fulfilling that, then you really feel alive. That's why a person says, I feel alive. Okay? And that's why Habakkuk, the prophet, says that a tzaddik lives, in this sense, he's truly alive when he reaches that state of emunah, he reaches that state of faith. The Chazal amru rishayim b'chayim kruyim meitim. And that's why our sages similarly say that a wicked person, even when they are alive, is called dead. Because why? Because Hainu Mishum Shechasir Mimenu Tachlit Yitzirata. Because he's not living to his potential. Umishi higia lamalat ahavat Hashem umit'aneg bazeh b'yodea ta'anug hanifla shel or pnei melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If a person has really reached the highest apex of loving God and taking pleasure in his spiritually high state, of basking in the light of the King, lo mikri chai ela b'shashu omed bazeh hama'aleh. Once he knows that he's capable of attaining such heights, he can only be really considered to be alive when he's in that state. And when a person is sort of away from that state, instead he's sort of vegetating in front of a screen doing something else besides basking in divinity. So then he realizes he's not in a sense of completeness. Which is why no matter how many funny videos you watch on Facebook, that'll never give you true happiness. You never really feel alive. It's just a way of passing the time away, right? But if you want to feel alive, you'll only feel alive when you feel I'm fulfilling my purpose. I've reached my potential. Ve'al zeh amar Moshe Rabbeinu liYisrael vatem hadevekim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulechem hayom. And that's why Moshe says to the Jewish people, he says, you Jews today, after 40 years in the desert, have achieved the level of devekut, of devekus. That ultimate attachment to God means that you're all alive today. Chayim kulechem hayom. You've reached it. You feel alive because you've reached that sense of ultimate closeness with God. You've fulfilled your purpose. You've reached it. You've reached the mountaintop. You're alive. Okay, so that's what alive means in the context of nefesh chaya. It means that when God created the zebra, he created the zebra with perfect zebraness. And when he created the human being, Adam, he created him with perfect humanness, nefesh chaya, reaching that potential. Yes?
So I just want to make sure I understand. When Hashem created Adam, he was a human being, not a Jew, and he was a nefesh chaya.
Correct.
All humans are nefesh chaya.
Yes. All human beings, when they reach that potential.
So a Jew reaches his potential when he gets close to Hashem and does all the mitzvos, and a non-Jew reaches his potential when he does what he's supposed to do.
Right, correct.
Both can be a
Both can be
nefesh chaya.
equally alive. Right, each one according to his or her capacity. Yes.
I just would think that when they describe man, it should not have the hay. Because if the purpose of creating man, I mean, I don't know if that, maybe when Adam was created he was perfection, but the way we are now and afterwards, if man's potential, if man's role is to fulfill God's will and do what God wanted us to do on this earth, we're not complete and we haven't reached our potential, and we probably none of us have ever reached our potential, right? So I would think that man would be described without the hay.
What is the hay adding?
Because you said...
Oh, I see what you're saying. In other words, chayi versus chaya. Okay, no, the word chaya, simply used with the hay, means it's modifying a feminine noun. Nefesh
No,
chaya.
you said that without the hay, it's
No, I'm sorry. There are two shorashim. One is chet yud yud, and one is chet yud hey. They're both 3 letters.
yeah.
But he's saying that from an etymological standpoint, one means alive and not dead, and one means alive but not deficient, or not sad in some way. That's the difference between the yud and the hey at the end. Okay? But that's just a technical point. I wouldn't get stuck up. I wouldn't get held up on that. Okay. The point is that the word chaya in the Genesis portion of the Torah means that when Adam was first created, he was created with that sense of completeness, and that Adam was created with perfection. Now, we're created with that perfection in potentio, right? Which only means potentially we have the ability to achieve, right? But once we reach that potential, then we feel alive. Now let's take a look. What does this have to do with Parshas Behar-Bechukosai? Contained in Parshas Behar is the obligation to make sure that my brother is alive. And so if you take a look at these few psukim, it says, "V'chiyamuch achicha umata yado imach." When your friend is down on his luck, "V'hechezakta bo," then you shall strengthen him. Ger v'toshav v'chai imach. And it makes no difference whether he's a stranger or a resident, but you must make sure that he lives with you. And therefore says the Torah, "Al tikach me'ito neshech v'tarbit v'yareta me'elokecha v'chei achicha imach." Do not take from him interest or usury, and fear your God, so that your brother may live with you. Comes along the Nitziv, and he tells us something important. He says that there are two places in these two psukim where the Torah says the word chai. In Pasuk Lamed Hey it says v'chai imach, he must live with you. And in the second pasuk it says v'chei achicha imach, make sure your brother lives with you. What's the difference between the two? The first one says he shall live, without the saying whether we're talking about a brother or a stranger. And the second pasuk says v'chei achicha imach, so that your brother may be alive with you. And so what's the difference between the two? So the first thing that the Netziv says, which we'll just mention outside, is that, first of all, in an agricultural society, make sure that he has provisions agriculturally. If he doesn't have agricultural provisions, make sure that you take care of him. But this mitzvah applies equally in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. And in Chutz La'aretz, this mitzvah would manifest itself not just by giving him agricultural handouts, but also making sure that when you lend him money, and you're working in not an agricultural currency, but let's say perhaps in a business currency, in a business economy, I should say, then you have to make sure that the way that you interact with him will not cause him to fail, will not cause him to die. And so the second paragraph, he says, v'chei imach, or v'chai imach, v'chei achicha rather, he says, mashma'ut chei mitparesh al shnei ofanim, k'mo shekatavti b'sefer bereshit, perik beis, pasuk zayin, uvekama mekomos. As I've explained in Genesis and in a number of other places, the word chai is translated in two different ways. Pam mishma'o chai v'lo meit, upam mishma'o chai v'lo atzei. Sometimes it means alive and not dead, and sometimes it means alive and not sad or not deficient. V'chein kan harishon, he says that's why you have the two times it says chai in this mitzvah over here. Harishon v'chei imach kai al v'chiyamuch achicha ger v'toshav v'chai imach. He says that's why over here it says when anyone lives with you, if you live in the same neighborhood as someone, whether they're Jew or non-Jew, you have to make sure that they live, that they survive. If you see someone who's is dangerously in trouble, if you see someone who's destitute and is out on the street and they're starving, you can't turn a blind eye. It doesn't matter whether that person's a Jew or a non-Jew. You have an obligation, hainu shelo yamut l'shachat. You have to make sure that that person does not fall into an abyss of death and destitution and misery. Our obligation is to make sure that every human being survives and is brought out of whatever quagmire they find themselves in. And that's true universally for both Jew and Gentile. But the kan mishma'o v'chei achicha imach. But the second pasuk says, make sure your brother lives with you. And the word chai over here is the other translation of the word chai. See, the first time the word chai is make sure he lives and does not die. But the second time is make sure he lives and is not sad and is not downtrodden and is not realizing his potential. Shetachazik biyado lahalvot lo b'li neshech b'tarbit kidei sheyeh shaveh lach b'chiyut. And that means that for the Jewish brother, and this is unique to your Jewish brother, to the exclusion of your non-Jewish brother or your non-Jewish neighbor, you have an obligation to make sure that when you lend him money, you don't do so with interest. Why? Because your objective is not only that he should live and not die, but that he should live and thrive and succeed and feel alive. V'lo yochal et bisaro kasher yihiyeh muchrach l'shalem neshech, because if you make him pay back the loan with interest, you're essentially going to be compelling him to really dig into his own flesh, as a metaphor, so to speak, right? Really sort of take out the essence of his life. He says, and that's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew as far as the laws of interest. We all know that one of the inequities in Jewish law is that a Jew is not allowed to charge interest. A Gentile, I can lend money with interest. As a matter of fact, there have been many times in history where the only way Jews were able to survive economically, because we were precluded from so many other professions and occupations. We couldn't be landowners in certain countries. We couldn't enter into certain privileged professions in certain communities. The only way that we could make money was by being money lenders. And so that's how we survived throughout history. So if the Torah is against lending money on interest, why then is it okay to do it to a Gentile? And the answer is, says the Netziv, that there are two levels of benevolence. The first level of benevolence is that when you see someone is in danger, in mortal danger, you have an obligation to help them. It doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. We have an obligation to have compassion upon every single living creature. And therefore, make sure he lives and does not die. But for the Jew, you have an added obligation. Make sure he thrives. Not only that he survives, but that he thrives. That he thrives. And that's why you can't charge interest. Because, you lend him money, you'll charge interest. Fine, he will survive. He'll be okay. But he won't have the sense of accomplishment of thriving. Economically, it may cause him ruination, or at least not to be able to pull himself up and to really do well for himself. And my obligation for my fellow Jew is to do whatever I can to make sure that he thrives and has that sense of living in the original Genesis sense, not just in the survival sense. And that's why the Torah says v'chai twice over here. Once for all mankind, and once specifically for the Jew. Yes?
How do they deal with bank loans in Israel, where everybody's Jewish? So if you're getting a bank loan,
It's a very good question. Whenever you take a bank loan, my understanding is, at least this is what I did when I opened up a bank account years ago, I assume they do the same thing, is that you sign a piece of paper that says that this is a heter iska, that this is an investment and not a loan, whereas the bank is investing in you. I know that it's a very shaky kind of sort of loophole, because you're relying on basically a changed terminology, and it is very shaky. And therefore, optimally, if you didn't have to, you wouldn't. There are other ways. But that's the basic way they get around it. You take out a mortgage from a bank in Israel, you're basically saying, I'm giving you dividends on your investment instead of paying you back a loan with interest. And it's structured that way legally as well, at least in the paperwork, to the point where the rabbis say it's acceptable. But we are more dealing now with the philosophy of the mitzvah and not the practical aspect of the mitzvah. I just want to make one more point, and then I'll open up the floor. And that is that it's very important for us to distinguish between the benevolent deeds that we do to make sure that people survive, and the benevolent deeds that we do to allow our fellow Jew to thrive. And both are important, but sometimes we say, well, this is mamish hatzolas nefashos, this particular charity is saving people's lives, so therefore I'm going to focus my attention on that. But that might be a calculus that is not a fair calculus. In other words, just because one charity is involved in life-saving does not mean that it's a more important charity or benevolent cause than giving someone the quality of life that will make them feel whole again, that will make them feel like I have dignity, I have my sense of purpose and self back again. Because the Torah really wants us to do both. I have a situation, I'll share with you my own internal dilemma. A a very nice lady came over to me and said that, and we help this person regularly with basic living needs because she's a single mother and is having a lot of difficulty getting by. But she has another need, and that is the need to realize her potential as a human being. She's living, when you live from hand to mouth on a daily basis, how do you ever realize your potential? She's overwhelmed with raising the children on her own. She's overwhelmed with barely having enough to put food on the table. And so how do we make her feel whole? So she came to me and said, I need dental implants because I don't know how else I'm going to be able to get a job because my mouth looks terrible. And so the dilemma that I have is that, you know, to get her the dental implants would require a fundraising project that would be of the same magnitude, let's say, of feeding a dozen families for Pesach. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the dilemma then becomes, so how do we weigh this? Do we weigh this as, well, one is Hatzalas Nefashos, I'm saving lives when I focus on taking care of the basic essentials. And the other one is, no, so she wants to have that sense of dignity to be able to go out in the street and be able to present herself as a dignified human being. And when you read something like this, you realize that they're both important. And you can't say that one is more important than the other because one is life-saving and the other one is just life-invigorating or life-redeeming, if that's the term. I don't have a resolution to my dilemma. I'm just sharing with you the conflict. I'm not sure how to resolve it with limited funds for tzedakah, but that's really what this is all about. Yes?
Well, this isn't what I was going to say, but just an idea. You could try approaching a frum dentist who does this and ask him.
We got a great discount on the table, but it's still going to, so instead of 25,000, it'll be
But you don't
17,000.
have to do implants, you can use, there's bridges, there's, you know.
We've crossed all of those bridges, trust me.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we're getting involved.
Okay, what I was going to ask was, but doesn't, when it says achicha, that means another Jew, right?
But it only says achicha, the second pasuk.
No, in pasuk lamed hey it says v'chi yamuch achicha.
But then what does the Torah say? Vehechezakta bo, ger v'toshav v'chai
I know, but it's
imach.
referring back to v'chi yamuch achicha.
Well, so the way that I believe the way the Netziv would read it is like this. I'm about to give you a mitzvah that is going to address a unique attitude towards your achicha. But first I have to tell you that no matter who is within your purview in society, make sure they live with you. Then getting back to your achicha, let me tell you, you have to give him an added treatment.
So I hear what you're saying, but I think that's a little bit of a dray of the pasuk.
Okay.
Because I think it has to, the second part of the pasuk has to refer back to v'chi yamuch achicha.
Well, it does. I mean, it does because it's saying, listen, there's a universal standard. It applies to both achicha and it applies to the ger and the tosha. Okay? So the universal standard is the first chai. Okay? That's the universal standard that applies equally to achicha and to the ger tosha. Then let's go to the one that applies uniquely to achicha, and that's the second pasuk.
Is that why they call it a Hasidic word?
No, it's not a Hasidic word. The Netziv is very, very serious. It's very direct. Yeah. Yes.
There are some poor people that take advantage of the whole idea that we're supposed to take care of each other. Like, I'm not gonna, like, I just personally know, like, let's say someone comes to your door and wants money, and like, he's trying to raise money so that he can keep his wife in like designer lingerie or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, there are people that.
I actually have never had that experience. That's pretty. That's a new one. If someone came to my door and said, "I'd like my wife to have designer lingerie," I probably. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just happen to know this particular that she wears like cardan to sleep. Like, I know this particular family. Okay, and I was thinking, and he's like raising funds. This happened to me. That's why I mentioned that.
Okay.
And I thought, whoa, like, and he was raising money, and yet they spend it on things that I would
That are
never spend on
frivolous,
myself,
yeah.
ever. So, that's why I
The
brought
point,
that up.
well, the point you're making is of course, sometimes people abuse the benevolence of our community.
Yes.
You're 100% right. And of course,
So I
but you
think-
know something, a famous Rebbe once said, is that sometimes people will use the one abuser out of 100 who abuses the tzedakah system to justify not giving to the other 99. We have to know, we have to put it in its proper context. Yes, there are people who abuse the system, and especially when one has limited funds, limited resources, as we all do to give tzedakah, we have to triage sometimes. We have to know what the proper allocations that really speak to us or pull at our heartstrings or whatever it is. The point that I'm just making is very simple. Don't think that life-saving causes take priority over life-enriching or life-enhancing causes, because sometimes both are necessary. Yeah.
I also remember learning a lesson though from my father when I was little. My father was used to give a set amount to somebody who came collecting for tzedakah. And one night I saw him giving a lot more. And I said, Dad, why are you giving so much money this time? And he said, because there is an obligation to raise somebody up to the standard that they had. This person used to be very wealthy. Now he lost all his money.
Yeah.
And so if someone is used to a certain standard, we might have an obligation to give more because it's so hard for them to come down so low from what they had.
Your father was a wise man, is a wise
But
man.
is that true? Is it the obligation to keep someone in the way they used to be?
The Gemara says that. The Gemara does say that. But of course, there are limits to that as well. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.